Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here with Tank12, however you want to call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we are today reviewing the Tier 8 British premium heavy tank, the Caernarvon Action X. This premium vehicle has some upsides and some serious downsides, and we're going to talk about that in this review today. First, we're going to take a look at the characteristics, then we're going to jump into some gameplays, and finally you're going to have a little bit of a verdict on what I think this tank is, well, worth, if you should maybe pick it up or if you should skip it. So, first downside of this vehicle already is that it is an 83.4mm gun. This is a tier 8 heavy tank. 83.4mm is less than most tier 8 premium medium tanks have. That also means your alpha damage is atrocious. 230 alpha damage with a single shot. That will mean I've already turned off several players who want to have more alpha damage. So a lot of players who want to have higher alpha, who want a heavy tank with at least 320 alpha or maybe 360, they will not even think about this tank. And I'm going to tell everyone who wants to have a specific amount of damage with a single shot that if you want more than 230, maybe 280, you should stay away from this thing, because it's not going to get much better with that in mind. If you really hate having high BPM, but like a high rate of fire, but really low damage per shot, this is probably not the vehicle for you. But moving on, even for me, for my standards, I don't care all too much about having a high amount of alpha damage. I still think 230 is ridiculous, and it does sometimes annoy the living crap out of me, especially when you have games that are really, really fast-paced and where you cannot fight back for a long time, and you just don't rack up the damage because you've landed 5 or 6 shots, and it's, in the end, just like 1,000 to 1,400 damage. That really sucks, that blows. I'm just going to say that beforehand. But we're going to the more positive side of this vehicle already. You have AP, APCR, and high explosive shells. That in of itself isn't that great already, but the AP shells are fairly great. 226mm of penetration, that is really good. I think you're going to be able to work with that. You have a shell velocity of 1,020 meters per second. That is also decent for an AP shell. And also, these AP shells are actually rather cheap. Let's take a quick look. 680 credits that you pay for single shell. The APCR shells, on the other hand, they will set you back 4,400, and they have better shell velocity, as you can see here, 1,275, and they also have 258mm of penetration. You will use the premium shells when you are going up against some really heavily armored vehicles, but to be fair, in my personal experience, I haven't had to dip into too many premium shells so far. High explosive shells are pretty lame in terms of penetration, since it's a very small caliber, but they have great shell velocity and, well, they have a little bit more damage than the AP shell and the APCR shell. So basically for me, 4 rounds, that's more than enough. Now, another good side of this tank is you are going to get an insane rate of fire. 4.72 second reload time. That is on my vehicle right now with Brothers in Arms and with equipment like gun rammer and also venting system. I've been using like vertical stabilizer class 1, gun rammer, and venting system. This is a pretty good setup for me if I want to do like the max amount of damage. But personally, if you want to have a tank that is faster, if you want to have a tank that is maybe also capable of spotting like and having a higher view range, you can do that. You could switch out this firepower slot in the final configuration in the field mods. You can switch it out for a mobility slot, and you can have like, for example, real fast improved rotation mechanism to turn your tank faster. Or you could also just run with a turbocharger class 1, which will give you an additional, 5 kph if it's the mobility slot, and you're also going to be getting like more engine power. But moving on, the gun traverse speed is actually not all too shabby for a tier 8 heavy tank. almost 40 degrees per second. You have 10 degrees of gun depression, which is insane, but I think the 10 degrees of gun depression are limited to the front of the vehicle. I'm not entirely sure if you have 10 degrees on the left and the right, but don't quote me on that. You have 20 degrees of gun elevation, which is fairly nice, so you're never going to have too many issues with somebody being above you that you cannot hit them. With the 20 degrees of gun elevation, I actually noticed that I was able to hit a lot more targets than, in other vehicles that were above me. Aim time and the dispersion are really, really good. It's just that the dispersion values are quite atrocious when you are moving your vehicle and when you're turning the turret. So, yeah, I think Vertical Stabilizer Class 1 is really nice to have. Maybe I would switch out the Gunrammer Class 2 for the improved rotation mechanism because I already have really, really good DPM. And if I want to improve the DPM further without using a Gunrammer Class 1, I could just go with Premium Consumable. That is also always like an avenue that you can approach. But moving on to survivability, where this tank has some, well, I would say it has some aces up its sleeve. 1,550 hit points, which is fine. I think that's like with the field modifications all upgraded. Hull armor at the front is fairly decent. The lower plate is a huge weak spot and very easy to penetrate. And then you have 51 on the side and 38 at the back. One thing you have to be extremely cautious of is anything with a very large caliber might just go right through your side if you're side scraping. For example, the BZ-176, which you will face a lot of times when you're playing Tier 8 nowadays, AP shells will go right through the side of the vehicle, nothing you can do because it just overmatches the side armor. The turret, on the other hand, very well protected, 254 at the front, 152 on the side, 95 at the back. I don't think that the British turrets ever had like problems in terms of not being sturdy enough. I remember that the Tier 8 counterpart, the Caernarvon, the Tech Tree variant, actually has like one of the best turrets for any Tier 8 vehicles. It's like a really sturdy turret. Even like the Commander's cupola on top is a very small target, and that that gun mantle right there is extremely powerful. It's like really, really well protected. For example, like right here, this is like a very tough tank to go through. But obviously, other than that, the hull armor is the exact same as the other one. So yeah, armor-wise, I think if you're playing it on a slope, you're going to be quite satisfied as long as you can hide your hull. But as soon as somebody sees, like, has just a little bit of an angle, the lower plate, you're going to be suffering very, very quickly. The tank itself is not the fastest, but it's also not the slowest, so it's like in the medium right there. 36.3 kph top speed, 14.5 horsepower per ton. It also is a vehicle that weighs quite a lot, it's almost 70 tons. So if you have a turbo on this, for example, you're going to be going up at like 16, maybe 17 horsepower per ton, and you're going to have like 41 kph top speed going forward, and you're going to have like 14 kph in reverse. That is something that might just be like really appealing for players who want to be able to go anywhere or have like much better mobility than currently you have. But at the same time, I'm just kind of playing this as a Ridgeline Warrior, and sometimes I'm even stepping back and being like the support role where I'm not like the most aggressive player. Yeah, traverse speed is not that great, 33 degrees per second. It could be worse though, but at the same time, yeah, you want to maybe improve the traverse speed. Concealment-wise, this tank is very easily spottable, but spotting-wise, this tank actually isn't all that bad. 380 meters base view range. That is not all too shabby for a Tier 8 premium heavy tank. And you can see with the right training and maybe even premium consumables, you can go all the way above 440, 450 maybe if you have all of that in there. So in of itself ain't that bad. So having spoken about all of that, having talked about this, what is this tank like when you play it in game? Is it really responsive? Is the alpha damage that much missed when you're playing it? I will have to say it will really depend on the games. I'm going to show you 2 gameplays at least, and then we're going to have a final verdict. So let's do that first, and then I can show you guys just what it feels like when you're playing this tank, and what the frustrations are, but also what the great sides of the vehicle are, and then we're gonna have final verdict. So let's jump into the gameplay. Okay, guys, this is the gameplay I want to show you guys. It's a tier 7, tier 8 matchup, so a pretty nice matchmaking experience for the Caernarvon Action 10. But don't worry, we're not just going to be going up against tier 7 vehicles, but we're also going to be fighting mainly against the main tier 8s that they have on their team. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the strengths and the weaknesses of this vehicle, and I think we have to address like the very big elephant in the room, and that is the lack of alpha damage with this tank. The lack of any kind of good damage with a single shot is going to turn off a lot of players, and a majority of players will not even buy this tank or immediately sell it when they have bought it by mistake. 230 alpha damage for a tier 8 heavy tank is really brutal. That's so low. That's basically what you expect of a tier 7 heavy tank or maybe a tier 7 medium tank nowadays. That means you are going to be struggling with taking out targets when you do not have the opportunity to shoot them like 5, 6, 7 times in quick succession because they are able to run away from you or go into cover. So yeah, you're going to have a very high rate of fire, which is great. 10.17 rounds per minute, that is like just without 100% crew. But that's not going to help you all too much when your alpha damage is that low. It's going to create quite a few awful and very weird scenarios where you're going to be looking at enemy tanks while you're firing at them, and you just take away maybe 8 to 10% of their HP. And that is really awkward when you're fighting against vehicles that have bigger alpha damage guns and you trade for 400 versus 230 or something like that. And that's going to be the case in this matchup. You can see right there's a Skoda T56. We kind of ignore him, and this was a very big mistake by us because we're going up the ridge line. But a very nice thing about this tank is that you have the 10 degrees of gun depression, which is really nice. But you can see that the armor, which is mainly on the upper plate and on the turret, is not there on the lower plate. So I get absolutely whacked by that Skoda T56. We're losing about 900 HP in that single engagement, which leaves us on 402 HP in this scenario. And you can see we even were able to shoot the Skoda T56 once, but we only did critical damage without damaging anything or doing any damage at all. It turns out, these engagements are really awkward and uncomfortable. That means a lot of players use this more as a sniping tank, and I do understand that because if you're close by and you're training, this is a tank that does not trade very well. It trades very poorly because there are no other tier 8 heavy tanks that have, less alpha than 230. But still, we're going to see quite a few of the strengths now in this tank, and one of the main strengths is certainly its turret armor. You can see with the turret armor and the gun depression, we can now put some pressure on the VK and the Skoda T56. And they are not going to be able to do a lot against us as long as we're able to kind of protect that cupola, and if they do not fire very high penetrating heat rounds into below the gun and the gun mantler right there. Well, other than that, as long as we kind of have the advantage and the initiative in this scenario, we should be able to do damage over a longer period of time because we have a very high rate of fire. That's exactly what we're aiming for right now. We're aiming for doing damage against this VK and doing damage against this Skoda T56. Now, the standard penetration of 226 millimeters with the standard APU rounds, that's actually not all that bad. You are not going to be relying on a lot of premium rounds, but when you have to, you're going to have APCR rounds that have 258 millimeters of penetration. And that's what we're trying to do right here against this VK100. But first, we certainly want to knock out the Skoda T56 because we can see he's kind of on a reload. And now we have this very nice angle where we are on top of the hill, but they can only shoot our upper plate. And if they fire at our upper glacis from that angle, they're not going to be able to penetrate it. So this situation where you have a lot of the time, where you have the ability to kind of dictate the pace of combat, you're going to have a very good time with the Caernarvon Action 10. But you still have to be firing constantly and at the same time being able to pen these guys, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get the damage, right? You don't have the opportunity to go out of cover once or twice and put like 2 or 3 rounds into the enemy while, like having an auto loader or auto reloader and being able to do like 900 damage in a very short amount of time and then to fall back and reload. Here you constantly have to put pressure on the enemies to be able to do a lot of damage. And that damage will come rolling in when you have the angle, when you have the right place where you can actually penetrate these guys. And you can see we have this VK in a position where he is unable to fight us. We have basically all of the advantages for us right now. And we can basically just now slowly but surely farm these 2 guys. And we also did utilize premium APCR there because we just needed to have that additional penetration to go through the cupola of the VK, because it's one of those tanks that is really difficult to pen when you do not have the premium APCR. But yeah. Now we can actually shift over and go and fight the Oni and the Tiger P. And this is where you are able to utilize your, tier 8 advantage, where you basically don't have to worry too much about your armor because your armor is going to be tough enough against the Oni, and where your rate of fire is really going to come into play. And you can see where we are slowly but surely taking care of this Oni. I would say faster than actually slow, because we're just, in his face, and he has a very hard time doing anything against us. And we managed to kill him, and getting ourselves the 4th kill in this round, and being able to just move around and now go chase the Scorpion G and the Steyr Waffenträger. Now, I think it is a pretty good time to have a little bit of a verdict on the vehicle, because this is like these last 2 tanks have started to hide somewhere at the back, and that's where we are able to go in. And you can see somebody spots the Scorpion G, and we put 1 high explosive round into him, but unfortunately it only hits the gun or it doesn't do any damage. And that's why like the high explosive rounds are pretty useless, because they only have 42 millimeters of penetration, which is not going to get you very far, but you should be able to pen a Scorpion G nonetheless. This is a tank that is pretty well rounded in terms of armor and mobility. I think it's not the slowest. It's basically a mediocre heavy tank that is fast enough to get you from point A to B. It has enough armor to survive in the right scenario where you can go hull down. But other than that, as soon as you're exposed, you're going to have a very, very hard time. It's going to be very difficult to stay alive. But the gun is something of a blessing and a curse at the same time. The low alpha damage means that you have to be able to fire, enough rounds in a game that you are doing enough damage that you are still earning credits. But at the same time, the high rate of fire and the high DPM will mean that you are going to be able to shoot a lot of rounds in a short period of time, especially if you're able to utilize the armor effectively. And when you know the weak spots, you're still going to be able to, hit those targets and penetrate them and deal damage. And I think that's like the place where this tank does very well. For players who are very well versed with tanks that have high alpha, they are not going to like this tank. That's going to be a very certain fact. And I would tell them to stay very far away from it. But for all the other players who enjoy the high DPM gameplay with low alpha, where you're still able to do damage and you know where to go, and sometimes even to play the second line of offense, bit more as a supportive role, I think the Caernarvon Action 10 is not a bad tank in that scenario for those kind of players. But I still think the alpha of 230 is just too low. even though the DPM is very high. It would be great if they do improve the alpha, maybe increase the alpha to 280, take a little bit off, like give you a bit more reload time, just a bit, higher alpha, and then you have like almost the same DPM, but the shots do more damage. It would be nice, because at this kind of tier and with this kind of armament or caliber, maybe 280 damage per shot would be good. And then it would feel a lot more like a tank that is in a decent place in 2023. But since it's not that, since it's not in this case, it's a vehicle that I cannot recommend wholeheartedly, even though I like to play it. Yeah. So tell me what you think of the Caernarvon Action 10. And do you like it? Do you play it? Do you dislike it because of the alpha damage? And I'll see you guys on the next video. Till then, have a good one.